Everybody, welcome back to the Skillist podcast. I'm Matt Corradino at Caribbean Earth Skills in St. Croix.
And I'm Brad Salon from Root School in Vermont.
How's it going, buddy?
Pretty good, yourself?
Can't complain. The winter is here. The mangoes are coming early. It's a good thing.
Winter.
Yeah, what? It is winter. I was like fairly chilly a couple nights ago. I had to use a sheet.
It's gonna be -6 tomorrow.
How many inches of snow?
Right now, we got like a couple last night, but there's a solid 1.5 feet just sitting there.
1.5 feet of snow.
At least there's snow. The worst is when it's bleak and cold and there is no snow. So at least there's snow.
Yeah, when it's too cold to enjoy outside, but warm enough to still be raining.
Right.
That I don't miss.
Yeah.
A Pine Barrens winter, basically, is what I'm saying I don't miss.
Yeah. So, that's good. The solstice, though, which is today.
That means you can get more light.
Yes.
You're going to have like 6 hours of daylight pretty soon instead of 5.5.
Right.
Woo!
No, when you live up here, you definitely are like, oh, I get why this is a celebratory thing, because it's depressing as hell to have it be dark all the time.
So many alcoholics in the north. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
Grow that grain, make that alcohol, and drink it all in the winter.
That's the deal.
Yay! Yeah. Speaking of alcoholism, let's talk about kids.
Children.
Today we're gonna talk about kids and skills, and a little bit more specifically the ways to modify your tools or modify your tool making to get wee little ones into and get their hands on doing stuff. Which, there's like this idea, I think, that it's like kids have to be 7 to 10 before they start using a tool, and it is not so. You can get those wee little ones starting to use tools. You just gotta modify them. For my kids, I started them off super young with a replacement knife, and basically by the time that they were 3 and 4 years old, they were using a carving knife, and there was a very minimal amount of cuts.
Yeah.
There was like staging to it. And I know you have your little tool because your kids are young enough for that. But great way to get really young kids. I'm talking like as soon as they can grab stuff, less than 1 year old. You make them a little knife out of a hacksaw, an old used hacksaw blade. And you take the hacksaw blade and wrap it with some tape on one end, and that's the handle. And the rest of it is the saw blade. And then you can hand them a stick, and they actually see something happening when they're carving with that little thing. And because the teeth are dulled from some use, and even if they weren't dulled, like the teeth are so small, and a young, like 8-month-old's muscles are not really strong enough to do severe damage with that little hacksaw. So they might get minor nicks and scrapes, but they can't really open an artery very easily with that thing. At least my kids never did.
Yeah, no, the worst they could do with this is like put it in their mouth.
That's just a little botulism, no big deal.
Or just like some questionable paint that's on there. I'd say that
very
would be
questionable paint.
My bigger concern than them like actually hurting themselves with it. And you taught me this, and we introduced this to Ash when she was, like you said, that like, I think maybe she was a year and a half when we gave her this, and she loved it because like you said, you could give her a green piece of wood, she could actually scrape the bark off or saw a little bit into it and like actually have an impact. Whereas if you give kids, like I've seen people give kids other things that they can't like do anything with, and then there's no result, and then they bore of it really quickly, and then they're pestering you for a knife maybe before they're ready for it. And the fact that this has the ability to, like, they can't injure themselves with it, but they could experience like a moment of pain, which is good because they learn like, oh, I don't want to touch this edge to my skin, and they learn how to hold it, and they learn how to apply pressure through their wrist, and like all those very, very basic concepts you don't even think about yourself having to learn are present.
I've heard people talk about, starting little kids off with a butter knife and soap, and that has advantages too, as far as learning to carve. But what it does lack is what you just talked about. It's like there should be some potential for a consequence. It's just minor consequence, because I've seen kids who were like reared on that from the age of 2 or 3, given a butter knife and then a bar of soap to learn to carve with, and that's great. But how many times do they hit themselves with that butter knife and absolutely nothing happens? And then you give that very same kid a carving knife when he's 5, and he cuts himself because he's used to hitting himself with that butter knife. At least that scratch that 1-year-old gives themselves with that hacksaw blade is some kind of reinforcement that no, you don't want to touch that part of the blade. How much did your kids stick to that? Were they like carrying it around? Was it like their knife? Was it like instantly something that they were carrying with them, or did it take a while for them to get into it?
Yeah, she loved it. We have like a little backpack that's like her skills pack, and it was like this and her water bottle, and then I made her basically a stone version of this, where it was like really tiny teeth on one edge, the other side was completely dulled, so she could do the same pretty much with that as with this.
Did you bring that? In there. Did you have it for show and tell?
No, I forgot it up at the house. But yeah, that thing, it's just a flake. I dulled one side and micro flaked the other. Is pretty basic.
So the teeth that stick out are dull, but in between are just sharp enough that she can do the same thing that she would with the hacksaw?
Yeah, or like, when you make a hide scraper, how you like nip off all the little teeth, but without making it dull. So you're not crushing the teeth off, you're like actually napping them off. And you get an edge that you can remove material with, but it's not like these big sharp teeth that are gonna, serrated edge rip through your skin. So
did you notice cuts? Did you notice cuts with either of those on your kids when they were using them?
No, and she learned to use it pretty quickly, and like she watched us use knives from when she was tiny. She's also gotten a lot of kitchen practice. Like she's always wanted to be involved in cooking, and we did get her one of those like little chef's knives that's like pretty dull, and you could like, you can't really cut yourself with it. And it's like a little tiny one for a kid. Does it cut any vegetables? Yeah, she just especially like we'd start her on like, all right, we boiled these potatoes and let them cool, and we're gonna chop them up for mashed potatoes, or like let her cut up, some cooked vegetables, and that's what she starts with. And once she had skills, like now she's progressed, she's 4, and she can like chop an onion with a sharp knife, so.
What was the age at which you switched her over from the hacksaw to like something that carves?
2.5. Yeah, she started using this at 2.5, but it was like under tons of supervision, like her sitting on my lap, me holding the piece of wood and the knife with her, and like really working on that. And then by the time she was like early 3, she could carve on her own with somebody like watching her and being like, hey, you're about to break a knife safety rule, and like grilling into her that we will take your knife away. And whenever she would break the knife safety rules, we would take the knife away for the day. So there was like a real consequence. And then she learned like, okay, and now she can carve, and I'll like keep an eye on her, but it's while I'm keeping an eye on the whole group that we're working with, or like, she's 4 and she's like pretty much can carve when she wants to. And like I'm fully aware she will cut herself, Yeah. But like at this point I think she understands enough to know how to avoid a major cut, and like, she's not scared of it in a good way. Like, so she doesn't have that like flustering effect that kids can get with a knife, where they're, like she's aware that it will cut her. She has gotten some tiny nicks, but like she's had experience with it, and she respects it. She knows that like if I see her get off track with it, I will just like be like, it's in the bag for the day. Like
yeah. With my kids it was a little before the age of 1 when I started with the hacksaw knife, and then it was about 3 where they graduated to a carving knife. And just like you're saying, just supervise them when they have it out. And what I found made the difference as far as keeping them to respecting those rules is getting them their own knife, and not just like, you can use one of our knives, but their own knife. That's your knife. And it gets them more stoked about it, first of all, then they want to use it because it's theirs. But then it carries a little bit more weight when you're like, well, I'm taking that knife away. But if it's not theirs in the first place, they may not care as much. They're borrowing it anyway. And, Leo made some nicks in his hands with the hacksaw blade, but it was one of those ones where it's like, you see red, but it didn't really bleed at all. And there was only 2 times where that happened, and he was vigorously sawing at the time, and that happened, in pretty quick succession, and he basically never cut himself with that thing again. And he'll have cuts from time to time with the knife, but I think because it is something that was from such a young age that he already experienced, these little cuts that really weren't a big deal. Usually he cuts himself and, sucks on it, comes inside, Daddy, I cut myself. I'm like, okay, is it a bad one? Like sometimes, yeah, it's bad. And then, he shows it and it's not really that bad. And I think that's like an important part of this too. Like you said, you want them to be able to hurt themselves a little bit so that they learn to respect it and learn to understand it, and then don't freak out when they finally do cut themselves.
Right.
It appears as though you graduated to a children's knife with your children, which is probably a smart progression. The tipless Mora kids carving knife. We did no such thing. We handed our children dangerous stabby-ended knives when we did this. I have a slightly looser parameters under which I raise my children, I guess. You just might say.
Yeah.
What was that? You said my son was 4 when I handed him the chainsaw? That was...
I mean, you were directly there with him, but yeah, it was pretty funny, like, when we were visiting, to look out and be like, oh, Leo's got control of that thing right now. I mean, you had hands on it. Like, you weren't going to let kickback kill him or anything. Like, it wasn't flagrant.
And it wasn't a powerful saw or anything like that.
Right.
No, I don't think my wife liked that one too much, but Leo loved it. Oh, chainsaw! Daddy, let me use a chainsaw. It's funny because my daughter will follow those rules so, like, stringently, and my son will definitely break those rules. But if Eileen's around, Leo usually follows the rules because she's a little tattletale. Dang, a little tattle there.
I wonder if we'll have a similar dynamic with Ash and Ronan.
It's hard to tell. Do you notice any of that, like typical sexist girls like this, boys like that kind of behavior with your kids?
Not yet. I mean, Ronan's like so little. He's really just starting to like express preferences for anything. Or I think the biggest thing is that he gives a shit about me, whereas like Ash could care less about me for so long. I was like able to take care of her, but she wasn't like, she'd get excited to see me, but it wasn't like... With Ronan, like, I have equal powers of calming him down or putting him to sleep, of, like, all the things I can do equally or better than Sarah in terms of meeting his needs. But with Ash, it was like, there were times where she just absolutely needed her mom, and there was nothing I could do. And, like, she was clearly favoriting Sarah until she was, like, 2.5. And when Sarah was super pregnant with Ronan, then she and I started adventuring a ton together because of necessity, and she learned to rely on me, and now, we're thick as thieves. But like, there was a time where she was Sarah's kid who I took care of sometimes.
You were just kind of there. You were Sarah's nurse, and she was the mom. I was thinking another tool that's really great for young kids is a draw knife.
Yeah.
You have that sharpness factor that, obviously you got to be careful if it's sharp, but I mean, I typically use a dull draw knife for a lot of bow making, and it's remarkably somewhat safe for kids to use, because if you're using it with both hands, it's really hard to move your hands any closer than this in this, formation. Like I can't bring my hands past my chest, so the draw knife can only just barely touch me. So for your kid, they can do this motion and you're relatively not worried about them cutting themselves badly. Obviously, they can't be sitting down and have their knee in the way and possibly cut their leg.
Right.
But I end up giving them the draw knife quite often for carving projects because it's a great tool. They get to learn how to use it. They get to learn how wood works, and you're not so worried about them cutting themselves because it's just hard to cut yourself with the draw knife when you're using it appropriately.
Right.
So that's definitely a tool that I give the kids pretty often. They like to make swords. That's kind of like their favorite project, their go-to project. Leah will kind of make anything. Eileen's like a sword maker, and so they use the draw knives all the time. I got to get them their own because they're always losing mine, leaving it out somewhere random in the yard. So definitely the downside. They need their own.
Yeah.
But draw knife is a great tool for young kids.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And
because it occupies, like you said, both their hands. I mean, that's where all my scars are from knives. There's on my left hand. My non-dominant hand is just covered in scars from being dumb.
Yeah, it's interesting other people's reactions to a 1-year-old with any kind of saw, knife, tool. We had after he started using the small piece of the hacksaw blade, he knew what the hacksaw was when he saw me using it because he'd been using that blade, and so he just started grabbing the hacksaw. That was like the first saw that we were giving him was the hacksaw, and once he started using it a little bit, he would just roll around with that hacksaw all the time. And we had a family group come, and they all, not all of them, but most of them lived in New York City, and this lady, every time she saw him the first 5 or 6 times, literally screamed top of her lungs, "Ah! He's got a saw!" Yes, I know. It's a hacksaw, it's okay. He's gonna cut himself! Like, maybe a little bit, but that's okay.
Yeah.
He's gonna cut something else! I'm like, the hell no, he's not gonna cut something else. I'm not gonna let him do that.
Right.
It was actually super inspiring for her. She was freaked out, and she actually wrote a poem about 1-year-olds using hacksaws. And her husband was like, "Oh, she doesn't do poetry at all. I don't know what that was." Really inspired her with that one. He's rolling around with his hacksaw. And then a friend of mine was visiting, and he's traveled a lot all over the world, and had not that long before had come from, I want to say he was in Ecuador. Wherever he was at, it was like, in the woods, like a tribal type setting. And he was like, dude, the first couple times I saw him with the saw, I was like freaked out just for a second. And then he was like, wait a second, just 2 months ago I was hanging out and there was 3-year-olds wielding machetes. Like, it was no big deal at all for them to hand their 3-year-olds a machete.
Right. So,
there's definitely some cultural norms there that are really freak people out. And yeah, by the time my kids were 3, I would hand them the machete. But, I had a progression to that. I read something, and I find it to be very true, is that we greatly underestimate our children's physical abilities to do something, and we greatly overestimate their emotional abilities, especially like thinking that 2 or 3-year-olds manipulate us. And it's like, they don't necessarily, maybe they know if they cry they get something, but that's not the same as manipulation. That's just like, response, like cause and effect kind of learning.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you give a young child a tool, teach them how to use it appropriately, you'd be amazed how quickly they pick it up and how good they are at carving. Now it's great because he's 6 and take him to classes in the Pine Barrens where there's a bunch of 30-year-olds who've never carved before, and they're sitting there struggling trying to carve, and here's my 6-year-old just whoop, 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 carving no problem. And they're like, oh my god, there's a little kid doing this. I feel totally inadequate.
Yeah, I mean, something that's been kind of a cheat code for us too is like, since she was little, Ash has been coming out with me to our kids program that happens once a week, and that means she's had these older role models who are also subject to knife safety rules, who also lose their knives if they break the rules. So it's not just like a parent-child conflict. And then there's also like the peer engagement or like the peer role modeling that she gets to encounter. And then, on top of that, like, it's given us an opportunity for repetition, so it's something that's like in our face all the time. And it's also like, one of those kids this year, he was new to the program, And Ash came out, and carving time comes around. She sits down, starts carving, and he was like, "How old is Ash?" And I was like, "She's 3." And he was like, "What?" He was like, "I thought she was like 6 because of the way she carves." And I was like, "Nah, I mean, this is like clearly parent bragging, but at the same time, it was like, it is remarkable in our sphere of things, or in our culture, that like people don't trust kids with tools, but I also don't think they have the time and space to like, or the security or the feeling of security or the experience themselves to put those tools into kids' hands." But I think it does, like, a knife is one of the more powerful tools you can learn to use in terms of like your personal empowerment. Like watching an adult who is not fluent in knife use, probably never uses a knife outside of the kitchen, that is like, it's a big deal to be able to learn to safely and competently use a knife. So to just grow up with it as a baseline is pretty great.
Even like it's the number one. I could be wrong, but it's the number one tool in our modern world that's still used. I mean, even if it's just in the kitchen, pretty much everybody uses a knife. I mean, sure, there's people who don't cook their own food ever, but like who doesn't use at least a kitchen knife? But it's like one of those things that's easy for me to forget too, because I remember my brother was visiting here, and I was telling him about the hacksaw. Oh, it's so great, dude. You give it to them, and they learn how to use a knife really young, and then like they're much safer with a knife and he was just stopped me halfway through, and he's like, "Dude, we don't do knives in our house, okay?" I was like, "Oh, but Jojo, what about in the kitchen?" He's like, "Sure, in the kitchen, but I'm not going to hand him a little freaking stupid hacksaw in the kitchen."
Right.
Like, give him. Anyway, like it's funny how our cultural views on knives and what they're for, because nowadays a lot of people don't even. It's like a weapon is the first thing.
Right. I was gonna say,
first thing people think of.
We hear tons of stories about like, oh, my kid took their Swiss Army knife to school and they like shut down the school for a day.
Oh man, yeah. And what's funny about it too is that like when it comes to carving, you watch your kids, I'm sure too. My kids, like when they're carving and they're handling, it's like you could tell when you watch them. Oh, they're skilled at that. But then for the younger kids homeschool group, they have free time, and obviously every time it's like war. They're picking sides, and then you see these kids pretending like they're cutting, and then my same kids who are so good at carving, like they go to swing their knife and they're like, like whoa, hold on. That's not how you fight with a knife. Like, oh wait, that's right. I don't teach them how to fight with a knife just yet.
Yeah, exactly.
That's definitely for older kids, for sure.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, it's to center it in their world as a tool to accomplish tasks. It really is like, it is such a valuable thing to grow up having fluency with. Like, yeah. Other than opening Amazon boxes and cutting up potatoes, I think most people don't have much engagement with them.
No, but still cutting potatoes and opening that Amazon box is some engagement with them, which to me is to say it's valuable even if it's not like an everyday part of your life. If you're not like making cool stuff out of knives, it's still a viable, useful skill, because there might come a time in your life where you want to hold something and carve off of it,
Yeah.
And like, yeah, even in our modern world. So you had mentioned stones, and I'm wondering what level of flint knapping, what level of stone tool use you go for with your utes.
Yeah, so I mean, Ronan's too early for any of it, but with Ash, this summer she did a bunch of knapping with me, mostly pressure flaking, a little bit of percussion with more of like me watching carefully, or just like kind of crushing an edge, deliberately onto a leg pad. The accuracy is a bit more of a challenge for her with that. And then with pressure flaking, it's really just like, I teach her the form, but then when her form degrades to like doing this shit, I haven't like harped on it a lot. I'm just trying to make it fun and give her really thin flakes that she can just like work the margin and make a shape. and you know, be like, oh man, you made an oval, how cool, and like, you know, like, I wonder if you could make a triangle, you know, that kind of thing. And she's super pumped about it. And then like doing bipolar percussion down by the river and just like basically finding quartzite pebbles and smashing them and being like, look, a sharp edge. She loves that. She loves just like finding quartzite and being like, Daddy, you can flint knap this. But yeah, in general, like I have some shorter pressure flakers that aren't like, you know, the ones that are so short they don't make sense. They're all Ishi sticks is what we have, but like we have some shorter Ishi sticks, and then she's got her own palm pad and her own leg pad and her own like couple pebbles for hammerstones, and abraders. And you know, I find that like making kids a kit of their own stuff, like you were talking about, like it builds some ownership into it, and that like, you know, same with bow drill. Like she has her bow drill kit. It lives in a little bag that we sewed with her. And like she has ownership over that now. And she's like excited about it. She keeps all the parts together. And yeah, so I think that those are the main things. And just like really making it fun. I think knapping is such like a cerebral, difficult skill that I don't feel any pressure to like have her achieve much with it at first, other than just enjoying it and being able to participate when I'm sitting in the pit and she wants to hang out with us. Like that's
I find the trickiest part about it is like keeping those expectations low, because you know, Eiley, she would love to sit down there and kind of smash, but she didn't have any care whatsoever what her product turned out like. Leo, on the other hand, is like a freaking natural. Like, I watched him the first couple times, and he was watching me for years. You know, I think he was 5 the first time he really sat down and tried it himself. And he would always watch me, but I wasn't as conscious of him watching because he wasn't like right there. And then I started to notice how much he was watching, and he sat down and was like, before he even was really striking much, because he wanted to do percussion. He was like, I want to hit it, you know, I want to bang the rocks together. And, you know, grainier, harder stuff is great to give kids because they can wail away on it and not make too many sharp little shards. And so I was giving him this tough, grainy stuff, and he was like, Daddy, that's the really hard stuff. Like, you said it was really hard to, you know, he's referring to me telling a student about how freaking hard this local stone we have is. It's like, I want some of that, and it's pointing to the obsidian, and I'm like, no, we can't move to that. And like finally convinced him, okay, you can use some of this flint, just because it's a little bit safer. And he was like surprisingly good, you know, like, oh, I hold it like this, right? I hold it like this, right? I'm like, yeah, well, you know, any way is fine. He's like, no, you hold it like this. I'm like, all right, yes, that you hold it like that. Hits it a couple times. Daddy, why isn't it working? I'm like, well, you got to hit it right on the edge. And then he starts hitting it and then getting upset that like it's not going the way he wants it to go. So for him, it's been managing expectations, but he's really, really good at it. And you know, that's a great thing about the flint knapping, at least in the beginning, is like kids love bashing stuff. You know, like they love just swinging really hard. So you're giving them the stones that are safer for them to start with, and then they can bash away. You don't have to be too worried about them cutting themselves much, but you're pretty much guaranteed they're going to get at least a few cuts in the flint knapping pit. But you know, it's a valuable thing. It's a valuable thing to have those little cuts and nicks when they're young, because they learn from a young age what's safe and what's not. And Leo progressed very quickly to where I had a hard time refusing him using the obsidian. And so I just let him use it, and I just make sure I'm sitting there when he does it. And like, especially his pressure flaking form, I'm watching him pressure flake, and I'm like, oh my God, he looks just like an adult who knows how to do this. Like, he's not getting the exact same results that I might get, or that you might think he'd get from his form, but just watching him do it, it's like, well, he's holding it exactly the way you're supposed to hold it. He's doing this just the way he's supposed to be doing it. It's been like, I'm definitely bragging on my son right here. As you can tell.
Yeah, man.
And this,
it's good.
I don't think that the pet camera's going to pick it up, but this was his first like project that he worked on. He was refusing to not be allowed to bottom arrowheads, and you see it's actually in the arrowhead shape, and I don't know if you can really see it well, but he's got flakes that like come a decent ways across this piece, right, almost halfway across, and I was pretty freaking blown away by that. And this was like his first real attempt at it.
That's awesome.
So yeah, super exciting.
I mean, so all of this is kind of like pointing to a couple of things too that like everyone who really has raised kids has a sense for, hopefully, which is that role modeling is really a huge part of it. That, you know, you can say as much as you want, but if you don't role model, you know, proper knife use and good form and good technique and, you know, a diligence with skills and a care for how things, like even laying a fire, you know, like how important it is, your technique in laying a fire. If you're, you know, your kids are going to copy what you do, not what you say. So I think like, you know, anyone out there who's either an educator or has their own kids that they want to learn this stuff, like do it in front of them. And even if they're not immediately engaged, like they're watching, you know, they're seeing it happen, and they're seeing like, okay, that's how a thing is done.
Pretty insane how in our society we'll like, you know, we won't let our kids use the knife because it's sharp and dangerous. You know, they can't use that saw until they're 15 because it's sharp and dangerous. Obviously this doesn't go for everybody, but you know, just generally speaking. And then, you know, we'll let them watch these like horrendously violent TV shows. And like,
dude, even cartoons are pretty violent. Like,
oh my God, crazy. Or even like sexually suggestive for like, you know, it's like my daughter's watching My Little Pony, and I'm like, the way they're drawing the ponies walk and like the innuendo, I'm like, holy crap. And I'm a bad parent for giving my kid a knife, right? I'm giving them a knife to use, and I'm like a bad guy. But like, look what they're watching. This is insanity, right?
Yeah.
And along those same lines, it's like, I get it. Like we have this, we want to keep our kids safe, right? We want to keep them free from harm, but like they watch us harm ourselves. They watch us endanger ourselves all the time, and it's a recipe for disaster if you're never letting them, you know, have that danger factor. You know, they're not going to know where the danger factor actually lies because they're not spending the time, you know, with the children's version of it, you know, like the little kids version of that knife, the little kids version of that saw, handing them those things and you know, teaching them how to use it on that little kids level.
Right.
You know,
and I think both you and I have a real good sense for like with that little kids version is that you can't nerf it to the point where it doesn't have any effect or it doesn't have any consequences.
No, they need that.
Yeah.
They need that.
And so it's like metering that consequence towards like minor consequences that heal within like 2 to 5 days. And and like, yeah, and they can affect the thing they're trying to affect, like that you're not making it impossible for them. I think that I kind of interrupted you, but it kind of brings me
you're good.
to bow drill. And one of my biggest complaints I've seen with other kids programs is that like people teaching bow drill who don't know it well enough to actually have the kids succeed at it used to drive me fucking crazy, because I would see these kids with these like 1.5 inch thick spindles and the kid weighs like 65 pounds, and I'm like, dude, I would have trouble getting a coal out of that amount of surface area and that amount of like friction on the end of the spindle to slow it down. Like that, you need to know the skills well enough to have a firm basis of understanding in which you can modify them to a point where somebody with a different body than you can succeed at it. And one of those modifications for bow drill is spindles need to be like maybe 5/8 of an inch thick with the materials we're using.
That little kid's thumb can't be any thicker than that little kid's thumb.
Right. So that they can actually generate the downward pressure and the force in the bow to spin it and create the right amount of friction for them. And if, like, the other thing that's useful, I think, that I've I've implemented is a really fat hand drill stock, and then you just help them get the socket in the bottom. That can be another really effective way of having them have success early with bow drill.
Yep.
And then definitely tandem, like doing tandem bow drill with little kids is a great way of having them like learn the form and gain some confidence and get to see some smoke or bust a coal with you. And then like it keeps it fun enough so that they can keep going. But yeah, the amount of fat spindles I've seen little kids like struggle with, and it's just like, yo, what are you doing? Like taking their instructors aside and being like, hey, let me explain some basic physics to you. Like, there's no way that kid will ever succeed. You could put 3 of them in a stack, and that kid would not succeed.
They still wouldn't work.
Yeah, exactly.
And, you know, there's nothing more defeating for a kid than trying and trying and trying and trying and trying and trying, and it's just not even getting smoke. You know, they're not gonna go back to that.
Right.
And you know, as an adult, if I come up and I put my hand on your hand and hold your hand in the position it needs to be in and apply a little bit of pressure, you're going to be way more dismissive of your ability to do that because, you know, you understand that you needed my help absolutely. But for, you know, especially a younger child, it's not going to matter nearly as much.
Right.
You know, like, yeah, some kids, I mean, I know my daughter, for instance, she's like, if you try to help her, she gets pissed. She's like, no, now it's not mine. Right? Like she gave up on a bow that we were working on because, oh, you did too much work. It's yours now. But so you get to watch that for some kids. But generally speaking, they're gonna accept that help, and you're better off giving them that help than making them struggle with it. You know, to an impossible degree. And you know what else I also think is great for kids, but you don't get the success factor. But there's a quick jump up in technique is starting them on hand drill a little bit faster than you might think, just because it's harder, right? It's harder to get it to function as a fire making implement, but it's much easier to perfect the form. And you know, generally kids are conscious enough, especially of physical things that they're doing, of like knowing that they kind of doing it right, you know, whereas with bow drill and they're like wiggly and nothing's holding together, like they're cognizant of that. Even I just found that showing them the hand drill and they're playing with it, like they can get pretty decent form pretty quickly with the hand drill. And you just tell them repeatedly, like, it's very hard. It's harder than bow drill. They've already struggled with the bow drill, so they know how hard that is. But at least they can get that form, and they'll perfect that form like pretty quickly. And then it refers back to the bow drill pretty well because they're seeing why it pops out every time. You know, with that bow drill, it's like they're not necessarily seeing that they're turning their wrist and that's why it pops out, or they're holding it a little bit sideways and it pops out. With the hand drill, it's tall, it's straight. If it's sideways, they can tell. If they lift it up, they knew they lifted it up. You know, I've noticed that it helps them with bow drill. And then obviously like the team factor, like teaming them up as a beginning, and then eventually through a number of, you know, I always got to make it a competition to keep them doing it sometimes, but you make that competition, you put a prize out there, the team gets it, and then once they taste that success, I found that generally they're like, now they want to do it on their own. Now they're like, oh, I want to be able to do that by myself. And, you know, so since we're talking about fire, oh man, the 5-minute fire, what a freaking great exercise for kids. I mean, adults would greatly benefit from doing it regularly, but it's definitely a go-to of ours. Maybe they can't start the fire with that bow drill every time, but that instance failure with the 5-minute fire, you give them the match. Oh man, they get to light a match. You know, how many times have how many kids, you can't play with matches. Now you bring them outside and like, oh, you're encouraging them to play with matches. So they're stoked on it, right? They're like, they're pumped, you know?
Dude, I taught Ash how to remove child safeties from lighters. Like, see, you need some pliers.
You got to get this thing that's made to make it hard for you out of there, kid. I want to use the lighter. First, we got to make it child unsafe.
Yeah, exactly. First, we got to remove this stupid thing off the lighter.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Well, so you give them the match. They're all stoked. They get to light a match. Maybe they burn themselves a little bit, but it's not like a big fire yet. So they learn pretty quickly, and then like it's crazy. Like even after they get it right a few times, like the repeated failure of not being able to get it lit, and then okay, why do you think it didn't work? It's like you get to do it 10 times before they finally realize that what you're saying is true, is not to just make a big ass pile of leaves, or like they need tiny sticks to get it lit. So yeah, I found that's a really huge skill improver. Gets them stoked on bow drill too, because then they start getting good at that, and it's like, well, what do we do next? What do you got to learn how to light it with a bow drill?
Right.
And
dude, yeah.
A lot of times what I'll do is I do the bow drill, and then I hand the tinder bundle to them to light the fire. And sure, first couple times they like flounder with it, but they learn pretty quickly that it's in certain instances it's actually easier to start the fire with the bow drill coal than it is with a match, because it has that sustained heat of the coal itself.
Right. Yeah, we've done tons of work with one match fire or like 5-minute fires. We've done whole progression series with kids where it's like, okay, first week groups of 4, second week groups of 2, maybe that goes on for a couple weeks till they're finding success. You pair the kids who are successful with the kids who aren't. Everyone gets brought up to speed, and then you're doing one person, one fire, spread them out along a trail, have them make their fires. And in Vermont, like,
that's burly.
40 and raining can be pretty rough, but they get there. And then we take birch bark away, and we're like, hey, no one's allowed to use birch bark. And they're like, is this even possible? And I'm like, you're going to travel in life to places where there's no birch bark. You need to know what to do. And then, then bow drill gets incorporated. And then we did this really fun thing where we started doing it where we were playing with different leadership strategies, where we'd be like, okay, today is the whole group needs to make a fire as fast as possible. You will be timed, and this one person is going to tell everybody what to do. And then the next week, it's like, it's going to be consensus. You guys have to make every decision as a group. And then the next week, it's like, you guys are going to elect 2 leaders, and those leaders are going to tell everybody what to do. And just like working through different systems of managing groups of people until they found out like which ones worked best. And it was really funny because like, first of all, they found out how shitty dictatorship can be, but also if the right person was in charge, how efficient it was. That like actually it was much easier. Right, and we were much faster when one person just made all the good decisions, as long as that person was skilled and proficient and honorable. And then like how hard it was to do everything through consensus. And then like one time we were like, no leadership strategy, no talking. And that was also super successful because everyone just did what they knew they needed to do in order to make the fire. But like, there's so many ways you can spin that goal of making a fire that it is a tremendous basis to which you can work tons of learning. And it's also a super valuable skill. Like we've had a lot of kids leave our programs and then come back as adults and be like, yo, of all the things I learned here, how to sit alone in the woods and not be bored is huge. And then how to build a fire. They're always like, people look at me like I'm crazy because I'm like, oh, I'll get a fire going and we don't have like a Duraflame log and it's raining and people expect that it's impossible. And I'm like, well, you find the driest things you can and then you build up one layer of the fire is responsible for lighting the next and like go from there. But yeah, and, I think like
just for people who might not know what it is, 5-minute fire is you give the kids 5 minutes, or adults. It's a great thing for anybody to practice. You give them 5 minutes to collect and build a fire structure, and you stop at 5 minutes, and then you give them one match, and then the fire has to burn for 5 minutes,
right,
in order for them to be considered successful. And especially where you live, I mean, that is such an important skill in a cold weather place. like, 5 to 10 minutes can be the difference between death by hypothermia or like, a couple hours of discomfort from hypothermia, and even here, like if you're in a shitty situation, like you're wet, it's a little bit chilly, like, all right, you don't really need it here, but it's still useful.
Right. Yeah.
But it's such a huge skill.
Well, and I think one of the things we're talking about too that I'd like to just like flesh out a little bit for folks is progressive overload, like the concept from weightlifting that like, okay, on week 1 you lift 100 pounds, on week 2 you lift 105 pounds, on week 3 you lift 110 pounds, and you keep increasing slowly over time so that you're hitting your wall you don't jump to 400 pounds. And something I see with people teaching kids is they tend to go too much in one direction or the other, where they're either like, okay, it's unsafe to lift anything, so just lift 5 pounds. And the kids don't get stronger. Or they're like, we're going to be hardcore, and they expect the kids to lift 400 pounds. And the kids then meet just abject failure. And then I hear things from people that it's along the lines of like, well, the skills aren't really about learning the skills. It's about community, or it's about like just being in nature and nature connection. And it's like, one, really? Like, can't it be about more than one thing? Like, can't it be about the community working together to actually learn skills while connecting with nature? But two, it's like the kids... or like unfinished projects where kids don't like make it all the way through finishing the basket or through I hate seeing the unfinished projects because
it kills me.
Right. And especially when it's the teacher's fault, like they just haven't programmed the right amount of time for it, or they didn't have the wherewithal to mentor each kid individually through it. They bit off more they could chew, or they prioritize other things. Like it is important to create a program for your own kids or for kids you're working with that takes into account like how long things are going to take, what the progression is, what's a viable progression from easy to hard, how are you going to meet the kids that are advanced, how are you going to meet the kids that are new to the skill, like how to really be functional with the skills at every level. It's so important because that really allows kids to flourish and have success and have challenge and not get bored. And, I think along with that, the model that both of us use with our homeschool programs where it's all ages pretty much, or like the age range is really wide, you end up having peer-to-peer mentoring where the kids kind of naturally break into offset age groups where like kids who are immediately close to each other in age don't operate that well together, but kids, when you skip a gap of age and you have like an 8-year-old with a 12-year-old, they're not threatened by each other. And so the 12-year-old is pumped to teach, and the 8-year-old is like, sick, I'm hanging out with this cool 12-year-old, and there's no vying for attention,
knocks down the competitiveness.
Right, exactly. And it's so powerful.
And you brought up all those like community building and leadership skills and like connection with nature, and I found that you get that so much faster by having a skill around which to work. Right? Like kids, humans are naturally going to do that. Yes, it's helpful to give suggestions like, oh, hey, let's stop for a little bit and let's listen. And what do you think that bird's saying, right? But then going back to the skill, and I find that if you make it about this soft skill, like something that's not tangible, that's not hands-on, that people's minds wander. We're trained in a very specific way in our society, and that is like this goal-oriented point A to point B kind of linear thinking, and you got to use that linear thinking to get them into that circular thinking. And it just like, the connection with nature is an abstract thing until you've experienced it. So it's just somebody else's thought until you've experienced it. In my experience, it's been best to give them a skill, right? Whatever that skill is, like it's made out of wood, right? So it's nature, even if it's not in the tree growing form, it's still nature. So they're having an experience with it, and that just naturally leads to, I want to make a new one. well, now we have to go out and find the stick, you know. So I feel like, yeah, it's a lot more effective to start with the hard skill and move to the soft skill than start with the soft skill and move to the hard skill.
Well, and
speaking of soft and hard skills, what about archery for your kids?
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I want to say real quick before we get to that is like, relationships are built, not bought. Like you can't enforce relationships either with nature or with the community. You have to like build and develop them over time, and it takes being deliberate but not like forceful.
Well, that's the explicit versus implicit, right? There's certain things that can't be done explicitly, explained, right? It had to be done implicitly. They have to be like experienced, and community and relationships with nature is definitely one of those things.
Right.
Yes, you can like have a formula that you follow, but you can't expect results from the formula. You can expect results from the experience, but that formula can fail as well as succeed. Whereas experience of that is never going to fail.
Right.
Right.
And it's like something again that needs to be role modeled. Like.
Exactly. Yeah. And that experience is going to be huge, whether it's a success or a failure. People are going to really learn from that. And if it's the system, then it gets back into that linear thinking. Well, this system didn't work, and now you're using another system, and these aren't systematic. These aren't systematic things. These aren't things that can just be taught. I mean, yes, you can role model them. You can teach them in a roundabout way, but you can't, okay, we're going to follow this. We're going to start with our morning address, and then we're going to move on to this next address, and then here's our 7 steps to conflict resolution. Yes, those things can work. Yes, they can, but it's about experiencing them, not about like explicitly teaching them.
Right. Right. What do you role model? And again, like not in a hokey, like putting on a show sort of way, but in an actual day-to-day, week-to-week sort of thing.
Yep. And letting the conflicts arise to a degree. Right? Giving the space for that to actually happen.
Right.
So that you can resolve those conflicts. Right? In minor ways. Obviously, you don't want to let it get out of hand. But, you need to have space for that to possibly happen so that you can actually resolve something. So, yeah. Ooh, man, we're jumping around now. But we're getting back to this.
Yeah, so archery
for your kids.
Yeah, I mean,
so I started my kids with this these mulberry bows that I made for them from some staves somebody gave me, and I think this thing at its full draw pulls like 12 pounds, something like that, and I definitely let them use field points on the target when I'm there, but like I made them a whole boatload of like soft tip arrows to just give them to roam around, and it's really great. And what I did to start to be sure that it wasn't going to be like the neighbor's dog or my daughter is, it was like, oh, you want to do archery? All right, shoot me, right? And this is just an arrow that I found. Like people lose arrows on our archery course. I found it. I'm not going to use it, so I took some pipe insulation. And I made 4 little triangular cuts to be able to smash this end down, wrap it with some electrical tape. And, man, kids freaking love these right here.
Yeah.
And, yeah, like I said, it's like you don't want them just roaming around shooting stuff. Well, get the padded arrow and have them shoot you.
Right.
Right? They'll have fun. You'll have fun. And they get to learn, the skill of drawing that bow back and releasing it.
Right.
And, yeah, Leo's just now graduated to this bow that he made the other day from one of our other podcasts where he said, I want to work on my bow, Dad. That's the bow that he finished. And he really did like well over 50% of the work on this thing. It was an ugly baby. It had this deflex into it. But and I found that with kids, it's better to give them a long bow because it's much easier to draw, it's much smoother to shoot, and it's easier for them to pull. They're not pulling it back to 28 inches. They're pulling it back to like 12 inches. So even if it's like 35, this is probably 35 pounds for me, but for him, it's like 12 pounds. He's only pulling it a certain distance.
Right.
That definitely makes a huge difference giving them the longer bow. I mean, these are great because they weren't too big for them to handle when they were 3 and 4, but like it very quickly improves their archery if it's easier to pull back, which this is easier for them to pull back, and it's more balanced. I think that people stick with these short little bows for a little bit too long for their kids, and it benefits them to go to a longer bow, I think, sooner.
Right. Yeah. All the bows I built for Ash have been way over long. I've just built her too. I, took some side splits or some like belly splits and built some bows for her. And at first it's just like, can I fling an arrow? And we've always used, like, at least at first, we used those slip-on rubber blunts just on like a broken arrow, like you said, or like, somebody breaks the tip off their arrow and now it's too short for them to put a point on. Those donator arrows have come Ash's way. And then for her birthday this year, I got her some like store-bought arrows with pink fletching that she's real pumped about. But like I think the main thing is like, again, metering those expectations and being like, well, you're not going to shoot exactly like I shoot. Like, the goal for you should be like, can you hit the target or the target area, not like the bullseye, or like, can you fling the arrow in the right direction? And like, are you having fun seeing the arrow fly? And, just going to a field and being like, let's just see how far the arrow can go. And like those types of things, and just making it fun, as opposed to like the practice of archery. And then like making sure nothing hurts with it, so that like she's not slapping her wrist, making sure the bow is oriented well, making sure like, that it's fun. And then I think for a long time too, like the archery range that we have is kind of like out of the way. Yours is like right in the main space, so they see it a lot. And I really had to
difference.
Right. And like the month or two before hunting season, I pull up an extra target so that like, even if things are crazy hectic, I can get, 50 arrows through my bow every day. And like her seeing it made her want to shoot a lot more. And it made me be like, man, you really need to like prioritize taking her down to the range with you, or just leaving this target here so that it's in her face and she shoots more. And there's so many things to do with your kids. It's like impossible to do it all, but it is, she's definitely got to a point now where she can like aim and release an arrow and throw it in the right direction. And she's like comfortable putting an arrow on the string and, all the first skills that you're like, don't even think of. And then you're like, oh, this is actually really hard for, like, I think I started her when she was like 2.5, and just getting the arrow on the string, pulling it back and releasing it was like a pretty big challenge.
Well, that was a lot of, I'm holding his hand or her hand on the bow, I'm holding their hand on the arrow, and I'm pulling their hand back but letting them release it.
Right.
Was the only way to do that. But it's so exciting to see them when they're like 4, 5, 6 and they're shooting on their own, even if they're not hitting the target, just watching them pull it back and release. It's just like, dang, why didn't I have that when I was a kid? Super exciting doing this stuff with your kids. And man, we could probably talk about this for like 10, 15, 20 episodes, different facets of this.
Right. Well, one thing I did want to ask is kind of interesting is like, it's with your own kids, you're responsible for whatever the consequences are, but when you're teaching other people's kids, you're also responsible for whatever the consequences are, but you don't have the level of control, and also you don't have the level of like buy-in or commitment to that kid. And so what do you do to meter that? Like, we are really express with parents like, hey, we're going to teach your kids how to light matches. We're going to teach your kids how to make a sling stone fly. We're going to teach your kids, how to use a knife. And then they're going to want to do that stuff at home. Like, you are responsible for creating the rules and the housing for which they're allowed or not allowed to do those things in a way that doesn't like smash your neighbor's window out or, end them up in the hospital. So like, be prepared if you're putting your kid in our program to know that you have a level of responsibility for controlling like their new skill sets.
Yeah, well, we have like a series of consequences for like the rules, like for instance, knife safety, like we have our knife safety rules and then we have our knife safety consequences, right? For this, you lose the knife privileges. For this, you got to sing a song. For this, you got to, for this, you lose knife privileges and you have to sing a song. And so then when number of kids they wanted to buy knives and have knives and the parents wanted to allow them to have knives, but they don't know what the hell they're doing. They don't know what kind of knife. And so we just print those out and hand them to the parents. Like, parent contest. Oh, well, my kid says she wants to buy a knife, but I don't know what kind to get her, what kind of this, that, and the other. Okay, well, before you do that, here's our knife safety rules, and you should be aware of them. Your kids are already aware of them. They probably are going to know them way better than you do, but like, here's our consequences for each. Your kids already know them, but if you institute them, then that usually helps. But typically what we've done in the past is parents who aren't ready for that, we hold on to the knife and they use it each week as they're by us. And it's like, all right, it's time to talk to your parents and just say, hey, they know how to use this. They've been safe with it for X number of days. But I always pre-warn parents, like, it's dangerous, right? Like, there's going to be cuts, there's going to be those things, but they want to do it. They're going to learn, right? Like, I get cuts from time to time, but it's been a while since I've been to the hospital for any of them. So, like, just accept that there's going to be some risk. And a lot of it is just, like, trust your kids a little bit. But, that's a really tough one. That's the only way we've really dealt with it, is just explain to the parents, these are our rules, these are our series of consequences, this is what we do when this happens, this is what we do when that happens. And what I found really helps, especially with kids, is like that shock yelling at them, like, and making it a really big scene. There's an archery program here that's run by a friend of ours, and he just causes a scene anytime somebody breaks one of those rules, steps over the line. Hey, what are you doing? Why are you stepping over the line? You're gonna shoot somebody! And the kid is like wilting under this yelling, and they don't do it. They don't do it again. All right. Now, that's around me. They're not going to do it because they don't want to get yelled at. They don't want that hard consequence. Now, when they go home, is the parent going to be willing to like do the yelling? Is the embarrassment going to go anywhere because the kid's seen it and heard it too many times? There's always that impossibility, but just informing parents what we do.
Right.
And, there's always been that trust build up because we haven't had any major injuries in our homeschool program.
Right. Swift and harsh consequences.
Yeah. Yeah, we had one injury, and this wasn't in the homeschool program, and it was like, I turned my eyes for like literally 15 seconds, and the kid had cut himself with this machete. I literally like turned my head, grabbed something, went to turn back around. Oh man, like damn.
Yeah, chopping tools, man. That's a whole different level. Yeah.
Scary. Well, I learned a lot from that. It's like, all right, only hand it to him if I'm standing right over top of him the entire time, and just be ready with that. Hey, stop what you're doing right now. You're not allowed to do that. Yeah. Right? Like,
that 1 second of inattention, too, is crazy. Like, we had I wasn't there for it, but we had this kid at summer camp, and she was cutting her P-cord for bow drill, and the instructor was holding it like this, like out in front of him, but with two hands, and she put the knife on it facing down, and he's holding it, and then a kid to his right, like, falls over a stump, and he looks at the kid, and in that moment, he looks away. The girl takes the knife from pointing down to pointing towards herself and pulls it right through the P-cord and taps herself in the forehead with the knife and just opens the skin of her forehead.
Lots of blood comes out.
Blood comes running down her face. He like grabs an ABD pad, slaps it on her head, comes running to us, and is like, this kid cut her head open. It's just like the dumbest thing. And you're just, knives are dangerous. Like, kids can cut themselves, and it's just that one moment of not being there to watch. But even then, like, after talking to the parents and the way that we handled it, they were like, honestly, we're more comfortable, and these are really cool parents, but we're more comfortable with you guys now because we know how you respond. Like, you hit her with first aid immediately, you engaged with us directly about how you wanted treatment to go or how we wanted treatment to go, and like, we responded effectively. And as long as you do that, I think like parents are happy, like to know that you didn't just waffle out or like not know what to do or panic, you know, like.
Well, these particular parents did not react that way.
Yeah. Oh man, we had one.
It's unfortunate.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate for the kid because, you know, these things happen. I can't believe you let them. Yeah, I can't believe that. And I was like, well, you know, you asked him to work. Anyway.
Yeah.
It was not a good response. But, you know, that's all right. It's like, that's my responsibility. I'm willing to take that responsibility because, you know, I believe in what you gain from these skills.
Right. And that kid will never use a machete in a way that's like not conscientious again because they understand firsthand.
Never.
Yeah.
Never.
Sweet.
So
well,
that was that was a pretty good hour there.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, if you're watching at home, there's oh wait. You don't like that?
Yeah.
You don't like that.
What do you got there?
I don't like my.
Is that a spearhead?
This is a spearhead. Did I show this one already?
I don't think so.
If I did or not. So, this is a spearhead. I got a couple of slate points up here with these barbs on it. So, that's the first keep method. Not the first catch, that's the stabbing, but the first keep method is these two barbs, and then I have these two lower barbs. It's a quad dent. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4 forks on it, and so the fish can come in here, and then this way with these extra two barbs, it can't turn this way and swim out. So no matter which way it turns, it's caught by all 4 barbs. And this is, you know, it's not that big, but because I reinforced it with all the cordage that keeps it from splitting, and because it's just flexible enough, you can catch a larger fish than you think with something like this.
How does it have 4 points? I can't see it well enough. Is it a natural grown stick like that?
It's a natural 4 points. There's a fork here, and then these two, because it's an alternate growth pattern, these two are just barely offset.
Okay.
From being opposite one another.
What kind of wood is that?
Branches here. This is bunchberry, Eugenia monticola.
Oh, that's dope.
Right here. Yeah, this one came out really sweet, and I harvested a squirrelfish with this one. And I need to do some work to retighten these, but it was great. This is for higher up in the water column. I can't be hitting the bottom with this because these slate points will not withstand the blow against hard corals. But for higher up in the water columns, I chummed a lot.
Oh, cool.
Smashed up snails, mixed it with some sand, tossed it in the water, waited, missed a few times, and then finally had that. It was right near the surface, which definitely helps.
Yeah.
It wasn't well caught, but this barb right here kept it from getting off. It just barely caught this way, and then its body turned, and then this one jabbed in.
Dude, those squirrelfish are fast as hell, too.
Yeah, they're super quick, but he wasn't paying attention. He was too busy munching on some smashed up snail. He wasn't very big, but what the heck, he tasted good.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then I have it's like a 12-foot long piece of bamboo that this inserts into, and you definitely learn pretty quick how much nicer it is to have the fish on the end of a cord. So this just shoves into the bamboo spear, and then once it releases, once it stabs into the fish, this releases out of the spear, and then it's just swimming around with the spear point in it, and it can't get away as easily because it doesn't have the resistance.
Right,
this thing
to like flop against.
The fish goes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
dope. It doesn't have anything to fight against because it just follows it wherever it goes.
Man,
so it's only had one successful use with it, but it didn't break, so I can use it again.
Yeah, that's awesome. You're getting high tech over there.
Yeah, you know how we do, but you don't like that.
I don't like it at all. Since we're on the topic of kids, I brought down a couple things I made for Ash and Ronan. This is a rattle, so like the trick where you carve a ball inside a cage.
Yep.
This is out of basswood, and this one's pretty cool. This was one I made for Ash, and she, teething on it, chewed the ends off, which is pretty funny. And then this one I just recently made for Ronan is like 2 rings that are on this piece. And again, it's like all carved from one piece of wood. And so you just carve the rings and then slowly carve out the middle and get them to detach. So these are pretty fun projects. I definitely find that like we've been talking a lot about carving today, and there's just something, especially with basswood, it's so easy to carve. It's so meditative, and like it's a skill that you can put down and pick up anytime, which with kids is pretty important to be able to like have something that you don't need to finish immediately. Like you're working a hide, you can't just immediately stop and pick up your crying infant. So yeah, these are fun skills. This one especially, like this one doesn't give the excitement to a kid that you would hope for the amount of work that it is.
That other one has a better sound with the multiple things clacking against each other.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
This one's a favorite. He loves this thing. So, yeah.
Yep. And it's not cheap, crappy plastic that's going to end up in a landfill one day.
Right.
So
exactly. It's
got that plus.
Just some basswood.
Is my mother-in-law listening? It's not cheap plastic.
Oh my God.
I'm in trouble now.
Oh, it's so real. Kid stuff, all of a sudden you're like, life is inundated with brightly colored plastic bullshit.
So it's been a good hour talking about the Ute stem.
Yeah, man.
If you enjoyed that one, you can let us know what you think for future episodes. And thanks for listening. And I guess we'll see you or hear you next time.
Yep. Right. Right. Swift and harsh consequences. Yeah. Yeah, chopping tools, man. That's a whole different level. Yeah. Uh, yeah. That 1 second of inattention too is crazy. Like, I wasn't there for it, but we had this kid at summer camp, and she was cutting her P cord for bow drill, and the instructor was holding it like this, like out in front of him, but with two hands, and she put the knife on it facing down, and he's holding it, and then a kid to his right like falls over a stump, and he looks at the kid, and in that moment he looks away. The girl takes the knife from pointing down to pointing towards herself and pulls it right through the P cord and taps herself in the forehead with the knife and just opens the skin of her forehead. Blood comes running down her face. He like grabs an ABD pad, slaps it on her head, comes running to us and is like, this kid cut her head open. And it's just like the dumbest thing. And you're just, I mean, knives are dangerous. Like, kids can cut themselves, and it's just that one moment of not being there to watch. But even then, like, after talking to the parents and the way that we handled it, they were like, honestly, we're more comfortable. And these are really cool parents. We're more comfortable with you guys now because we know how you respond. Like, you hit her with first aid immediately. You engaged with us directly about how you wanted treatment to go or how we wanted treatment to go. And, like, we responded effectively. And as long as you do that, I think, like, parents are happy, like, to know that you didn't just waffle out or, like, not know what to do or panic. You know, like, yeah. Oh, man, we had one. Yeah. 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 Right. And that kid will never use a machete in a way that's like not conscientious again, because they understand firsthand. Yeah. Sweet. Well, yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah. What do you got there? Is that a spearhead? I don't think so. How does it have 4 points? I can't see it well enough. Is it a natural grown stick like that? Okay. What kind of wood is that? Yeah. Oh, that's dope. Oh, cool. Yeah. Dude, those squirrelfish are fast as hell, too. Yeah. Right, to like flop against. Yeah. That's dope. Man, you... Yeah, that's awesome. You're getting high tech over there. I don't like it at all. Since we're on the topic of kids, I brought down a couple things I made for Ash and Ronan. This is a rattle. So, you know, like the trick where you carve a ball inside a cage. This is out of basswood. And this one's pretty cool. This was one I made for Ash, and she, teething on it, chewed the ends off, which is pretty funny. And then this one I just recently made for Ronan is like 2 rings that are on this piece. And again, it's like all carved from one piece of wood. And so you just carve the rings and then slowly carve out the middle and get them to detach. So these are pretty fun projects. I definitely find that like we've been talking a lot about carving today, and there's just something, especially with basswood, it's so easy to carve. It's so meditative, and like it's a skill that you can put down and pick up anytime, which with kids is pretty important, to be able to like have something that you don't need to finish immediately. Like you're working a hide, you can't just immediately stop and pick up your crying infant. So yeah, these are fun skills. This one especially, like this one doesn't give the excitement to a kid that you would hope for the amount of work that it is. Yeah, this one's a favorite. He loves this thing. So, yeah. Right, exactly. It's just some basswood. Oh my god. Oh, it's so real. Kid stuff, all of a sudden you're like, life is inundated with brightly colored plastic bullshit. Ah. Yeah, man. Yep. Yeah. Do the thing. Till next time.